Before cities and empires, we were wanderers on this pale blue dot. Our journey began in flickering firelight, painting stories on cave walls. As tools evolved from stone to bronze, so did we. Now, gaze upon the wonders of ancient civilizations. Pyramids, ziggurats, great walls. This is humanity's greatest journey, written in the stars and etched in stone. For centuries, the universe was a place of mystery and miracles. Humanity lived beneath a canopy of stars it could admire, but not yet explain. The movements of planets, the fall of an apple, the flight of a bird, all were wrapped in the divine, the unknowable. Ancient thinkers like Aristotle and Ptolemy had long provided the answers. The earth was the center of the universe, they said. Heavens moved in perfect circles, crafted by the hands of gods. But in the 16th and 17th centuries, a quiet revolution began, in the minds of a few bold individuals. Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish astronomer, dared to suggest a heretical idea. The Earth was not the center. It was just one planet circling a much greater sun. This simple shift from Earth-centered to sun-centered cracked open a door that would never close. Galileo Galilei, peering through his handmade telescope, saw moons orbiting Jupiter, a direct challenge to the idea of a perfect, orderly cosmos. For this, he would be summoned by the Church, forced to recant, but the idea had already taken flight. Science was no longer chained to the musings of ancient authorities. It demanded evidence, experiment and observation. The method was simple yet revolutionary: question, test and verify. In England, a solitary genius contemplated why apples fall and planets move. Isaac Newton wove together a new vision of the universe, a universe governed not by divine whim, but by universal laws of motion and gravity. As the scientific revolution unfolded, its spirit of inquiry spread beyond the laboratory. In smoky coffee houses and glittering salons, philosophers, writers and reformers asked daring questions. What is the nature of government? Of human rights? Of society itself? This was the Enlightenment, a revolution not of canons or kings, but of ideas. Voltaire championed freedom of speech and religious tolerance. Montesquieu dreamed of checks and balances to temper power. Jean-Jacques Rousseau proclaimed that governments must serve the will of the people, not the whims of monarchs. For the first time in history, ideas could travel faster than armies. The printed word became a weapon, scattering seeds of change across continents. But the Enlightenment was not without contradiction. Many of its greatest champions still lived in societies steeped in inequality, where wealth, privilege and slavery persisted. The promise of reason would inspire revolutions, but it would also reveal the long, slow struggle needed to truly transform human society. Yet the dream endured, that through knowledge, humanity could rise out of superstition, out of tyranny, and into the clear, cold light of reason. A dream that would fuel the revolutions to come, political, industrial and intellectual, reshaping the very foundations of the modern world. The scientific revolution and the Enlightenment were not merely chapters in a book. They were the ignition of a new age, where questioning the world was not an act of heresy, but an act of hope. And soon, that hope would erupt into revolution. The Enlightenment lit the mind. Now it would set the world ablaze. In the late 18th century, ideals once confined to dusty salons and secret pamphlets erupted into action, bold, bloody and irreversible. Across the Atlantic, in the colonies of North America, 13 provinces found themselves yoked to a distant crown, taxed without voice, ruled without consent. In December of 1773, a group of colonists disguised as Mohawk warriors hurled British tea into Boston Harbor. The gesture was simple, the message unmistakable: no taxation without representation. Within 3 years, these scattered colonies declared something unprecedented: not a rebellion against a king, but the birth of a nation founded on the rights of man. The American Revolution had begun. At Lexington and Concord, ideals met gunpowder. The struggle that followed would last 8 grueling years, a revolution powered by conviction, alliances, and stubborn resilience. "We hold these truths to be self-evident," declared the Founding Fathers, "that all men are created equal." A lofty ideal, even if for now it would exclude women, indigenous peoples, and the enslaved. Across the Atlantic, another storm was gathering, far larger, far more explosive. In France, centuries of inequality had bred a powder keg. While nobles feasted, commoners starved. Debt from wars abroad and extravagant courts pushed the monarchy to the brink. When the king summoned the Estates General, it was meant as a release valve. Instead, it became a spark. The Third Estate, the common people, broke away, declaring themselves the true representatives of France. They met in a tennis court, pledging never to disband until a constitution was born. On July 14th, 1789, Paris erupted. The Bastille, a medieval prison and symbol of royal tyranny, fell to the mob. The French Revolution had begun, a force so potent that it would remake not only a nation but the very idea of power. In the early days, hope bloomed. The Declaration of the Rights of Man proclaimed liberty, equality, fraternity, but revolution, once unleashed, is rarely gentle. The monarchy fell, the guillotine rose. Fear and fervour fed each other in a spiral of violence, the reign of terror. By 1794, revolution devoured even its own architects. And yet, perhaps the most radical revolution of all was still to come. Not in the salons of Paris or the fields of Virginia, but in the blistering heat of the Caribbean. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, modern-day Haiti, enslaved Africans heard whispers of liberty from across the sea. They did not ask politely for their freedom, they rose to take it. Led by the extraordinary Toussaint Louverture, the Haitian Revolution became the only successful slave uprising in history to found a free nation. Battling not just French armies but Spanish and British forces as well, the Haitians proved that the ideals of liberty were not bound by skin colour nor confined to Europe. In 1804, Haiti declared its independence, the first black republic in the modern world. But they would pay dearly for their freedom, isolated and punished by a global order that feared the power of their example. The age of revolutions had shaken the old world to its core. Thrones toppled, new nations rose, the very idea of who could govern, who could rule, who had rights, was forever changed. But liberty, once unleashed, is never easily tamed. The revolutions planted seeds of hope and seeds of conflict that would grow, twist and shape the centuries to come. It began not with a bang, but with a hum, the turning of wheels, the pumping of pistons, the whir of spinning machines. In the late 18th century, humanity entered a new age, one fueled not by muscle or wind, but by steam, coal and steel. The Industrial Revolution had begun. In the green valleys of Britain, workshops grew into mills and villages into cities. Here, inventors and entrepreneurs unleashed forces that would transform not just production, but society itself. At the heart of the revolution stood steam. James Watt, a Scottish engineer, refined the steam engine, turning it from a curiosity into the throbbing heart of industry. With steam, mines plunged deeper, factories ran faster, trains and ships could defy the limitations of wind and muscle. One innovation sparked another. In textiles, the spinning jenny and the power loom multiplied the output of cloth 100-fold, making clothing cheaper and more available than ever before. Ironworks forged the bones of a new world. Railroads stitched together landscapes, shrinking distances, knitting economies into vast humming networks. But all this progress came at a human cost. Millions left behind ancestral farms to crowd into smoky, teeming cities, Manchester, Birmingham, Glasgow, where fortunes were made and lives were ground down. In the factories, workers toiled 12, 14, even 16 hours a day. Children, some no older than 5, slipped between spinning gears, risking mangling or death for a few coins. The old rhythms of rural life, season, sunrise, harvest, gave way to the relentless tick of factory time. Yet for a lucky few, the Industrial Revolution created unimaginable wealth. Factory owners, bankers and merchants rose as a new elite, their fortunes built on the backs of workers they rarely saw and whose voices were seldom heard. But the people did not stay silent forever. From the crowded tenements and the factory floors rose cries for reform. Demands for shorter hours, safer conditions, the right to organise. Movements like Chartism in Britain and early trade unions planted the seeds of labour rights that would, over time, reshape the industrial world. And Britain would not hold its monopoly for long. The industrial contagion spread to the factories of continental Europe, to the steelworks of Pennsylvania, to the textile mills of New England. Everywhere it touched, it changed landscapes, economies, and ways of life. Steamships slashed travel times across oceans, telegraph cables stitched continents together, global trade exploded, pulling distant corners of the world into a new web of commerce and conquest. Yet beneath the triumphant roar of machines lurked deeper questions. Could humanity tame the forces it had unleashed, or would the thirst for profit, the ceaseless drive for more, tear societies apart? The Industrial Revolution gave humanity new power over nature and over each other. It shrank the world and enlarged its inequalities. It promised progress, but demanded a price. And it set the stage for even greater transformations and greater conflicts yet to come. While machines and ideas remade Europe, another revolution unfolded, one of empires rising to new heights and others slipping into shadow. The 19th century was an age of ambition, but also of decay. At the heart of this new world order stood empire. Vast, sprawling, hungry for resources, markets and power. Nowhere was this more visible than in Britain, the small island nation whose empire would soon stretch across a quarter of the globe. In India, the British East India Company had begun as traders, polite, deferential, eager for profit. But trade bred influence, influence bred power. And by the early 19th century, the British no longer merely bargained with Indian rulers, they ruled them. Yet empire was never a simple exchange. In 1857, Indian soldiers, sepoys, rose in furious rebellion against their British overlords. Sparked by disrespect, fueled by resentment, the revolt spread like wildfire. It failed, but it shattered the illusion that Britain's control was gentle or benign. In the aftermath, Britain seized direct control. India was no longer a collection of client kingdoms. It was the crown jewel of a growing empire. Railways stitched India's vastness together, but to serve colonial needs. English laws, English schools, English customs spread, often at the cost of ancient traditions. Across the seas, in China, another ancient civilization stood proud, vast, sophisticated, self-assured. The Qing dynasty ruled over 300 million people, confident that the Middle Kingdom needed nothing from the barbarian world beyond. But the British had found something China craved: opium. In exchange for silks and tea, Britain flooded China with the drug, enriching British merchants and devastating Chinese society. When Chinese officials moved to stamp out the trade, Britain answered with cannon fire. The opium wars of the mid-19th century exposed China's vulnerability to foreign aggression. and marked the beginning of what Chinese historians call the Century of Humiliation. Forced to sign humiliating treaties, China ceded territory, opened ports, and granted special privileges to foreigners. Pride shattered, the Qing struggled to adapt, caught between tradition and the harsh realities of a changing world. To the west, another titan stumbled toward decline, the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, the Ottomans had ruled a vast expanse, from North Africa to the Balkans, from the Arabian deserts to the gates of Vienna. But by the 19th century, corruption, military defeat, and nationalist uprisings had sapped its strength. One by one, territories slipped away. Greece won its independence. Egypt drifted into quasi-independence under Muhammad Ali. In the Balkans, Slavic peoples dreamed of breaking free. To European powers, the Ottoman Empire became the sick man of Europe, propped up by foreign interests more concerned with maintaining the balance of power than with Ottoman survival. Desperate to survive, Ottoman leaders launched reforms, modernizing armies, overhauling laws, building railways, but modernization came too little, too late, and often deepened divisions rather than healing them. By the end of the 19th century, the world's ancient powers had been battered by forces they could neither fully understand nor fully control. New empires had risen on iron rails and cannon smoke. Others clung to life, hollowed out, their fates increasingly written by foreign hands. The map of the world had been redrawn, and beneath its newly inked borders tensions simmered, waiting for the century's final cataclysm to ignite them. As empires expanded and machines conquered nature, new ideas were awakening, ideas that would redraw the map of human loyalty, dignity, and justice. Ideas that promised freedom, but also carried the seeds of new and terrible conflicts. For centuries, people had lived tethered to village, to lord, to king, their identities local, their allegiances personal. But now a different idea took root: the nation, a shared language, a common history, a belief that a people, bound not by rulers but by culture and spirit, should govern themselves. In Italy, revolutionaries like Giuseppe Garibaldi and Count Cavour fought to weld a patchwork of kingdoms and duchies into a single nation, Italy, whole and free. In Germany, the Iron Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, used diplomacy, deception and war to unite a fractured people into a powerful new empire. Nationalism was a force that could inspire poetry or light battlefields ablaze. Alongside nationalism rose another force: liberalism. Liberals dreamed of a world where rulers served the governed, not the other way around. They championed constitutions, parliaments, civil rights, the idea that all citizens should be equal before the law. Across Europe and the Americas, liberals fought, sometimes with words, sometimes with weapons, to bring monarchies to heel and build new societies of law and liberty. Yet their victories were often incomplete. In many places, old elites adapted, absorbed, or crushed liberal demands. But for millions of workers crowded into factories, liberal promises rang hollow. Political rights meant little if you lived and died at the mercy of a factory clock, with no voice and no security. In a small, dimly lit room in Brussels, a radical new voice sharpened its pen against the injustices of the industrial age. Karl Marx, a German philosopher in exile, argued that history was not driven by kings or ideas, but by class struggle. In 1848, Marx and Friedrich Engels published the Communist Manifesto. It was a call to arms. Workers of the world, unite! You have nothing to lose but your chains. In Marx's vision, the capitalist order would inevitably collapse, swept away by a proletarian revolution that would build a new, classless society. At first, few listened. Marxism seemed like a fever dream to many, impractical, utopian. But as industrialization deepened inequality, Marx's vision began to resonate, especially among the disenfranchised, the poor, the angry. By the late 19th century, the world was growing ever richer and ever more divided. Nationalism gave peoples a new sense of identity, but also sharpened rivalries between them. Liberalism won freedoms for some, but left millions mired in poverty and disenfranchisement. Marxism offered a radical cure, but one that promised upheaval on an unprecedented scale. Dreams of freedom, dignity and justice danced across the skies of the 19th century. But these dreams, nationalism, liberalism, Marxism, would collide in ways no one could foresee. The world was speeding towards a new century, one that would test the strength and the limits of these great ideas. For thousands of years, human communication traveled at the speed of a horse, a ship, a whisper carried by the wind. But in the 19th century, the world learned to speak across vast distances, instantly, and nothing would ever be the same. In the 1830s, American inventor Samuel Morse developed a device that could send electrical pulses along a wire, pulses that could be decoded into words, dots and dashes, simple yet revolutionary. In 1844, the first long-distance message, "What hath God wrought?" raced between Washington and Baltimore. It was a moment as profound as the first printing press or the first written word. Soon a network of telegraph lines crisscrossed continents, shrinking the vastness of the world into a spiderweb of instant communication. Business deals, political news, personal messages, all flashed through copper veins faster than any horse or steamship could carry them. But ambitious minds dreamed bigger. Why not connect entire continents? In 1858, after years of daring attempts and catastrophic failures, a cable was laid across the floor of the Atlantic Ocean, linking Britain and North America. A message that once took weeks to cross the ocean by ship now travelled in mere minutes. The transatlantic cable was not just a technical marvel, it was a symbol of a new, tightly wound world. Steamships reinforced these new connections. Where once a voyage across the Atlantic took months under fickle sails, steam cut the journey to mere weeks. Reliable, predictable, unstoppable. New routes stitched empires together. London to Bombay, Paris to Algiers, New York to Havana. For the first time, people could read news of distant wars, revolutions and disasters almost as they happened. Stock markets danced to events continents away. Politicians made decisions based on information that was hours old, not weeks. International communication wasn't just faster, it was now a business, a weapon, a force of empire. Governments used the telegraph to control colonies, direct armies, and negotiate treaties at breakneck speed. Merchants used it to manage far-flung supply chains and banking empires. The world was being wired together, but not equally. The cables of empire ran from London, Paris and New York, radiating outward like spokes on a wheel, binding colonies and markets to the centres of industrial power. Global communication was a marvel, but also a mirror of global inequality. And change only accelerated. In the 1870s, Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone, allowing human voices to leap across wires. By the turn of the century, inventors like Guglielmo Marconi were sending wireless signals through the air. The first faint echoes of the future we now inhabit. The 19th century ended with a world utterly transformed by steam, by steel, by electricity. It was a world more connected, more informed, and more restless than ever before. A world poised on the brink of an unimaginable new century, one filled with dazzling hope and looming catastrophe.